Hi, David.
Hi.
Today's episode of I've Never Met a Woman Architect Before podcast is sponsored by the Structural Insulated Panels Association. SIPs are structural insulated panels. They're a high performance building system for residential and light commercial construction. The panels consist of an insulating foam core sandwiched between two structural facings, typically oriented strand board OSB. SIPs are manufactured under factory controlled conditions and can be fabricated to fit nearly any building design. The result is a building system that is extremely strong, energy efficient, and cost effective. And you can contact them at sips.org, SIPS.org. Thank you. So I'm here today with David Hertz of David Hertz Architects. And David Hertz, FAIA architect, founded Syndesis in 1983 and S.E.A, the Studio of Environmental Architecture, a practice focused on regenerative design in an age of resilience. David won the 2022 Smithsonian Cooper Hewitt National Design Award for Climate Action in 2018. Hertz won the Water Abundance XPRIZE, a $1.5 million prize to make over 2,000 liters of water from air. In 2006, David was awarded the Distinguished Alumni Award from SCI-Arc, and in 2008, he was elected to the prestigious American Institute of Architects College of Fellows as one of its youngest members in its over 155-year history. David's award-winning work has been published widely and exhibited internationally. Some highlights include exhibitions in the Museum of Modern Art, MoMA, Smithsonian National Museum of Natural History, the National Building Museum, and the Cooper Hewitt Smithsonian Design Museum. David has taught studios and lectured at Yale, USC, UCLA, and Art Center. Welcome, David.
Thank you. Happy to be here.
So I'm doing this series on wildfire and rebuilding, and I want you to just kind of talk. I thought it was interesting because you are not only an architect, you are also a wildfire firefighter. And so if you want to speak a little bit about that.
Sure. Yeah, I think as you mentioned in the introduction, I mean, I've been practicing architecture 40 years. My initial focus was really on sustainability. It became apparent that we've moved really into an age of resilience where the resilience imperative is upon us in terms of how we relate to stressors. And one of those stressors is certainly living in the wildland urban interface that I live in Malibu, has made us acutely aware of the impacts of climate change and on the built environment. And ultimately, how do we balance the built environment with the natural environment and coexist in a world that's going to be much more extreme? And so I was very interested in water and in terms of the X Prize and the abundance of water in our atmosphere. And actually, interestingly, used fire to make water and through a process called pyrolysis. And the idea of fire to kind of cool the earth through
Mhm.
carbon extraction, carbon sequestration. So I guess from a almost an alchemical standpoint, I'm fascinated with nature, um, the elements of fire and water and the dualities. And I wanted to learn more about fire behavior and became a wildland firefighter. And I'm with LA County Fire Department Division 7, but through an innovative program that I helped organize called the Community Brigades. And the community brigades came out of an idea from the Woolsey fire, where a number of us stayed behind to defend, and um, and realized that there's a big gap between first responders and the community, and a certain situational awareness and local knowledge that community members really have. And over a 5-year process, we were able to convince with enthusiastic support now, the LA County Board of Supervisors and the LA County Fire Department, which embraces the first community brigade program. And only months before these fires in our area, that we were involved with three fires, right away, and including the Palisades fire, which was the most destructive fire in LA County's history. So it's very interesting as an architect who have been interested in home hardening and fire resilient construction, which I've employed in my own properties in Malibu, and for clients for years, but to actually be uh, personally witnessing the destructive aspects of fire, which homes burn, which ones don't, and being able to actually walk around more than 1,000 properties in the fires for damage assessment and fire mitigation and um, fire hardening in advance. I've gained a lot of pragmatic, kind of tacit knowledge about what works and what doesn't.
Mhm. Mhm. Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, I have one fire rebuild that's in Altadena. It's also just amazing, like what the fire, it's the winds from it. It's like you know about the burning, but you don't necessarily realize like the winds that were blowing through. I mean, especially in the Palisades, but then also just like how things are just, it's almost like a tornado hit the house as far as like just all of the appliances were like kind of in one big heap in the center, as opposed, to just like burning where they were, and things that are scattered, from
Yeah,
the.
we had over 100-mile-an-hour winds in the Palisades incident. And it literally is a fire tornado and everything is blowing. The the urban conflagration is really what conspired. Is that you have a wildland fire that with the winds you have an ember cast in some cases go 3 miles in advance of the fire front. They're under pressure. These embers can get into all kinds of elements of the property, from the landscape to the building itself, into vents, attic spaces, crawl spaces, plumbing vents, fireplaces, um, sit on beams, sit on joists on decks, um, and ignite. And then once you have a house that's ignited, then then it's kind of a conflagration where the radiant heat energy from one structure is so great that it burns the next structure, and then you have this domino effect, this horrible cascade of which you've all seen, these entire neighborhoods decimated as if it was kind of an atomic bomb because
Yeah.
everything is, and very few properties can survive that. But it is very interesting to see, and I think. What you could also see, that I was doing assessments in, say, the Big Rock area to help evacuate people and prepare for the fire front. And there were homes that we would just call like no-goes. Like they're not defendable. They have the textbook example of what not to have. They have
Mhm.
flammable lamps,
Shake roofs or something.
yeah,
Yeah.
wood,
Yeah.
post and beam,
Yeah.
old house on a hill. You're surrounded by eucalyptus trees with railroad ties, with decks, with fences that connect to the house. And then you see, say, a wide street with sidewalks, with gravel, with very little landscape, all stucco, non-combustible materials. And I'm going to make a defense here where it's safer. And when I went back after the fire front to help with mop up, the house that you thought was going to burn survived, and the house that you absolutely thought was going to survive didn't. So, so all of the rules kind of go out the window also, sometimes, and that just purely has to do with luck. And
Yeah. Yeah.
either a home was defended, um, and in which case I know that these two weren't defended, but I'm just also giving an example that there's an exception to the rule, and and sometimes you can say, well, that survived. Well, it only survived because of pure um, fluid dynamics of which way the wind happened to be going and which way the
Yeah.
timber gas went. Um,
Yeah.
and it also was a perfect storm, that something that you think was defensible the most defensible thing could still have an Achilles heel. So someone left in a hurry and left a window ajar or a door, or there was a broom leaning up, or a doormat caught on fire that connect or a door, door, or the things I never thought about, like vinyl window on the side yard, okay, where the house next door is on fire, the fence is on fire. Well, the vinyl has a very low melting point. Whereas that house maybe another house had an aluminum window and they happen to have a tempered glass panel because, it was lower than 18 inches and from the ground it had to be tempered, or it was a sliding glass door versus a window, and the window broke because it wasn't tempered, and the incremental cost of having a tempered glass could have saved the house. So
Yeah. Yeah.
those are really interesting things that are learned from experience.
And even that other one that was in the Palisades that like that did survive, but I mean, even the architect there was like, hey, the person in the house next door, their car exploded, and and part of the debris went through the window, so it could have easily, but it just happened to be that maybe it was already, the fire was coming through at a different time or something, and so yeah, it didn't. But he said, but yeah, it could have gone, had the car exploded before when the fire was going through, it could have just gone through the entire house, because
Right.
of that access,
Yeah. Yeah, and there were also a lot of things that house in particular did well. That is a good example. It didn't have eaves, it had metal roof, it had good clearance, it had side, setbacks, it had fire resistive construction. So,
It was
what
fairly new, so nothing was
fairly
grown
new.
around it. Yeah.
And that's a big
Yeah.
factor actually. And unfortunately, that's a big factor in the Palisades, that a lot of the houses in the Palisades that were developed, were even pre-war housing that very
Mhm.
very kind of what we would consider kind of substandard construction now. Our energy codes like Title 24 require newer buildings just to be tighter. Well, if they're tighter from an energy standpoint, then they're also more defendable from a fire standpoint because they're not as leaky and there aren't as many places from infiltration for embers to also get in. But the older houses were older materials, they had eaves, they had attics, they had raised, crawl spaces. And sadly, the character of the community is forever changed. And if you go to some of the communities in Malibu, like from the Woolsey fire, that had, older homes, and now you see everything's kind of replaced in a fairly insensitive way with defensible architecture. Maybe it's more defendable. It's if not done well, it loses some of its charm and character, and
Yeah.
you
Yeah.
have a loss of the granularity of the community, right? Because not like these communities were not necessarily all billionaires and movie stars, like people from outside the communities. No, they were actually working class neighborhoods
Yeah.
that were more affordable than being in town, so people went way out. And then,
Mhm.
they inherited their home and they don't really have any money and they're underinsured, or things were built over the years without permits. So they can't afford to rebuild, and so they leave. And so a lot of the character of the community is lost with each of these events.
Yeah.
And new
Yeah.
ones will be formed.
Pardon me?
And new character will.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. And yeah, and so it's not that, it's not that neighborhood that typically grows up, where there are things built, especially in LA, there are things built. It's not like there was one whole tract of homes that were all brand new, it's like
Right.
it's more the history of Malibu. And then, the newer projects are like interspersed in this, right, which is old Malibu, which is kind of that, yeah. Yeah, which some people don't really, they don't realize that there is an old Malibu,
Yeah.
right? It's
Yeah.
like,
And the
yeah,
same with Palisades. I mean, a lot of the houses are
yes, yeah,
very old. People didn't have money. They inherited the house. So there will be a replacement. The question is, there's a rush to replace, which, everybody wants people to replace what's lost in that tragedy quickly. But is there a rush at an expense that the changes will only be incremental and that this will happen again? Because that's certainly been the past. And if the past is prologue with respect to the rush to rebuild, um, and having only minor incremental change, then the disaster will repeat itself in the future.
Yeah, yeah. And I mean, it has, right? I mean, there's some people that homes have built burned down twice in the Malibu fires, like over the years, just in the last like what, 30 years.
Yeah, well, one of our brigade members lost his house in the Woolsey fire, moved to the Palisades, and lost their house in the Palisades fire. So,
Mhm.
yeah, it's it's harder and harder to get away from disasters. There's somebody moved from Malibu to North Carolina and got lost their house in the.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah. Yeah.
I think we have to look at
Yeah.
what are the underlying stressors that are creating these extreme
Mhm.
weather events, and I don't think there's any rational person that believes in science is gonna understands that there's human induced climate change is a major factor in affecting planetary systems and weather patterns, and things are getting more extreme, and the question is how much more extreme, because every single thing is breaking a record in an increasingly fast pace, and so it's really just a question is what is the capacity, for nature to, make things almost uninhabitable in some places. And, we live in this remarkably equitable comfort zone on this planet. There's no other planet that we're aware of that is a living planet that can
Yes.
sustain human life. And
Yeah.
there are certainly periods over our six extinctions on the planet that have made it uninhabitable for species. So, that's the notion of resilience, that resilient systems are anticipatory for change. They're nimble, they're dynamic, they're modular, they're repetitive. And they could be more responsive. In fact, even the model is one of anti-fragility, where anti-fragility in a system is that the stressors actually benefit. So if you think about our muscles, if we lift weights, we're creating stress, and too much is too much, and you cause damage, but too little, you certainly atrophy. So
Yeah.
case where a stressor is actually a benefit to the system. Same with a tree. You don't restrain a tree, or it needs to build its own lignins and fiber strength. So how do we think about our systems in a way? And that could be fire suppression systems, or our cities where, okay, there will be stressors. How do we use those stressors? If there's a major stressor of, say, a huge torrential rain event, how do we kind of use natural systems to use that as a benefit? Hey, we just collected a bunch of water
Yeah.
for future use instead of letting it go to the ocean.
Uh,
So, if there's a hurricane, could we take all that debris and use it to, generate, immediate mobile fuel and, water?
mhm. Yeah. Yeah. So, and then we always have to think, it's like you can only, right, like these codes are only so that people can exit the building, right? I mean, that's like the first thing is, preservation of human life, right? And then, like, I mean, in firefighters, it's like if there's a loss, like why endanger somebody? If it's like you're not going to make people go in to fight a fire if there's, if it's endangering someone's life, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Oh, and unfortunately, this fire was there was not really a lot of emphasis on structure protection in the beginning because it happened so quickly. It was so overwhelming. You couldn't really fight the fire, so it all turned to the priority being evacuation and saving lives. Which in the Palisades incident was fortunately much better in terms of the minimization of the risk of life, which could have been
Mhm.
absolutely catastrophic. I mean, if you think about this event happening in the middle of the night, the results, like in Santa Rosa or even in um, Paradise Fires, could have
Yeah.
been.
And in San Diego, there was one at night, so they couldn't see anything. Not only could you not see to get out, but, of course, when you're in so much smoke, you can't see, so people couldn't see the road. They couldn't, yeah.
Right. And you're in the middle. I mean, as it was, we were evacuating people that were sleeping, that didn't know the fire was there, you know, um, that next night, as it came into
Mhm.
knowledge. It-
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And I mean, one of my friends, they just, she just told her husband to go get the dogs, right? So he just got the dogs. He didn't think that it would burn, so they didn't really take anything. And she wasn't at home, and they lost both, houses on the same street. They had a rental, and then they were living in one.
Yeah.
Yeah. So what are your first recollections of experiencing architecture?
Well, I was, I was very fortunate in that I had creative parents. I had a mother who was an artist, and a father, although he was a surgeon, he grew up building with his father. He built, there's a western town called Paramount Ranch in the Santa Monica Mountains. My grandfather um, bought that movie ranch in 47, and my father and grandfather built it all out of kind of salvaged materials. So my
Mhm.
father, my earliest memories of a kind of an architecture was like sitting on the garage floor, my dad working on the workbench, and every Saturday or Sunday was some building project. That was his passion, was tearing things apart, constructing them, remodeling, building things. Um, so in some ways, architecture became a perfect marriage between the science of, medicine and the art. And I grew up in the 60s and 70s, and primarily in the 70s, and kind of junior high was the birth of skateboarding, making our own skateboards, the birth of BMX bicycle riding. I used to manufacture my own bikes. We had like a heavy industrial arts legacy still in my junior high. So, we were welding and machining and making our own tools, and and that kind of the meaning of making things was still very important, and it was still very analog. Um, and I was taking technical drafting classes in junior high and learning how to draw axonometric drawings of nuts and bolts and pieces of
Yeah,
machine.
yeah.
And and that kind of really started me on a path of kind of evolving from construction, where I did work in construction and with different craftsmen, to architecture. And so I think it started in junior high. Um, and then through high school, I was very focused on that. I had the experience to meet an architect kind of through the surfing community, a man named Robert Bridges, who I just saw the other day after many years. Unfortunately, he lost his iconic home in the Palisades. Um, that was kind of a very, very visible house hanging off the cliff of Sunset.
Mhm.
Um, and but he was a real mentor. So I was basically ditching classes in high school to go sit into class at SCI-Arc with him. And I met Ray Cappy, and so I was admitted to SCI-Arc. Had kind of already built a portfolio of things I had designed and built, mainly furniture and other things. So I started SCI-Arc at 18, and
You were young. That's a young SCI-Arc student at
yeah,
18 at the
yeah,
time. Yeah.
for sure. And built, designed and built my own house, and before I was 21. So this is my 41st year of since graduating. Um, but I think I clearly knew what I wanted early on. I think the question is, what is the role, what is an architect, and can an architectural education be broad enough to be a generalist? And I think one thing I worked for John Lautner all through architecture school, and then I got a scholarship and worked in Frank Gehry's office before opening my own firm in '84. Um, was was to be a kind of a generalist. I was inspired by a lot of artists. I was also working with a lot of artists in Venice. So on kind of side jobs of building models or helping be an assistant to some of the most formative artists of the light and space movement, with Dwayne Valentine and, Larry Bell and Chuck
Mhm.
Arnoldi and Robert Graham. And then I spent a summer building stretcher bars for Jean-Michel Basquiat.
Mhm.
Um, so, and then of course I was kind of rooted in the organic school that came from Frank Lloyd Wright, working with Lautner. And then the very contemporary world of Frank Gehry and Frank being very inspired in a similar Wrightian way, in a way that Frank Lloyd Wright wanted to build buildings out of the materials of its place. They happen to be natural environments or the plains.
Yeah.
Uh, and Frank Gehry similarly did that. He just used the materials of its place, which was the
Yes.
urban fabric. And then architecture really as art. So
Mhm.
it's an interesting way. I mean, having, certainly Ray Cappy as a mentor, but then John Lautner and Frank Gehry, and then, mixed in all the artists. And fundamentally, kind of the Venice studio of Charles and Ray Eames, which
Yeah.
was, you know, not just doing architecture, but doing graphics and design, and multidisciplinary. And so that I've always
Yeah.
had a short attention span for the same thing. And,
Mhm.
and I think been more of a generalist than a specialist and wandered into different things of interest because I always enjoy the learning process.
Yeah. Yeah, yeah. I was there from 89 to 99. And so I had a little studio on Westminster. So you could kind of like see 901,
Oh, yeah.
the AIM studio. So that was across there. But I was
Okay.
only there for, I don't know. I was there for a couple of years. I mean, I was in Venice for 10 years. We lived off the traffic circle in
Oh,
one of
yeah.
the little vacation bungalows there. And then I was, on Westminster for a couple of years. Um, but I mean, that was a great time. I was just talking to like Sue Addison and Jefferson Skierbeek yesterday, just kind of
Yeah.
about how like that was just like a great time to be in Venice at the time. I just felt like it was such a community and everybody was just, I don't know, you would just like see, you know, you would just see people and you'd go to SCI-Arc lectures and everybody had I mean, you had kids pretty young too. We had
Yeah.
kids like at 29, which was like seen as like being like, oh my gosh, but you had your kids even younger, right? Didn't you have your
No,
kids?
no, my first child was at 32.
Okay. And
Yeah.
then you had a house on the tour for one of the AIA tours. And so we were docents, and I don't know whether we were docent at your house, but I know that we went through your house that was on the tour the year when you had all the and all the syndicrete
Right,
counters and
right.
everything. And I think that like one of the great things about that product was that you you had the copyright, but you also had the copyright on the installation of it. And so everybody had to go through that, which I think is, I mean, I think that's great. Like, why not, because otherwise somebody, can just go ahead and use the product or whatever, and it wouldn't be. And I just think that like as a business move, that's like an amazing business move.
Yeah, it just came from control. I mean, to be only way to really control the outcome of the product
Yeah, yeah,
was to make
yeah.
sure that it was installed properly. And it was, challenging enough material invention that, it kind of required a certain amount of control to install it properly. And, I wanted to just deliver a turnkey solution that didn't, put me at risk or my clients at risk. So, we did fabricate, lots of elements and things with Syndicrete, but that was an early exploration. It evolved out of concrete from actually working with John Lautner, and obviously being fascinated with concrete, but also working in construction and pouring foundations and just kind of
Yeah.
being somewhat in love with this material that you could just kind of have liquid and create a void and fill it, and this kind of in some way additive process rather than kind of the typical subtractive process of starting with something solid and and chipping away at it. the
Mhm. Yeah,
cast.
like a sculpture. Yeah.
Yeah. So that was, about a 20-year, exploration into refining, advanced cement-based composites and, also creatively mining materials extracted from the waste stream that were generally commingled or didn't have any resource value and playing with the creative potential of it, picking up,
Yeah. Yeah.
electronic parts or broken records or brass screw shavings or bottle glass
Yeah.
and then grinding it
Yeah.
down to the terrazzo, which is interesting because, if you look through the arc of my career, I've been interested in radical reuse and repurposing,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
that shows itself in the 747 wing house reuse, or all the way to, what I recently landmarked at Xanadu of the Tony Duquette, estate, which is where he used old Hollywood movie sets and military surplus to build a fantasy land.
Mhm.
Um, so the aesthetic outcome is often very different, but the the idea of repurposing and appropriation of found objects is it's rooted in certainly in lessening the impact on the natural environment by reuse rather than
Uh-huh. Yeah. Yeah.
primary raw materials.
Yeah. Yeah. So what are your three classic buildings? What three classic buildings do you like and why? And they're not classical, they're classic, just as far as
Which are kind of iconic classic buildings
yes, yes.
about times. I mean, there's so many that I like. That I would go to. I mean, I would say, certainly right up there is like Falling Water is still such an amazing marriage of the integration with the natural environment and a kind of a building that rises up out of the rock. I mean, I would say, um, I mean, I love the sculptural aspect of Corbusier and kind of Ronchamp. Um, some of the Tadao Ando, kind of minimalist buildings. Um, I certainly love the playfulness of Frank Gehry and I would say, the embodiment of kind of the organic philosophy modernized would be the iconographic work of John Lautner. I mean, the
Mhm.
feel of a John Lautner house beyond all other buildings is I think resonates with me the most in terms of the daringness, the drama, the innovative way of building, still way ahead of his time.
Oh yeah, yeah, yeah. Um, so what do you like about being an architect?
I like that I like the generalist nature. I like learning. I love like integrating with different consultants. I'm not a specialist, like I'm not a geologist or I don't do,
Yeah.
advanced septic systems, but I, work with those people. I enjoy the collaboration with, other consultants like structural engineers, mechanical engineers, builders, clients. Um, the creative problem solving. I like the challenge of innovative kind of building typologies. Like, you mentioned sponsorship with SIPs. I did a
Mm.
32-room dormitory and 3 faculty houses and a commons building all out of SIPs, because I was interested in the technology. I did a similar
Yeah.
panelized house out of stress skin panels, refrigeration panels. I've done a couple houses out of tilt-up concrete. Um, I did a prefabricated house on an island in the Caribbean and Beckway. That's all worked, engineered our own aluminum extrusion, custom aluminum extrusion built in Java. The whole building is panelized, modular system, fully pre-assembled with all finish fixtures, um, all systems, the whole house, every light switch, plumbing, everything fully assembled in Indonesia, flat packed, disassembled, flat packed, and then reassembled by Javanese and Caribbean workers engineered, by engineers in Germany, um, and built in Indonesia with clients, from Europe. So um, that is a fun collaboration, So sometimes, I guess what I enjoy is the explorations. It's all about learning something new, which is why I get restless with, I don't tend to repeat myself or even have a, a, a totally identifiable style,
Yeah.
because I'm really always chasing the next kind of bright, shiny object. And that's taken me into divergent explorations, like explorations into materials development, or, you know, how do we address, water scarcity, or how do we make buildings more resilient to fire? Um, all those things, are part of it, or forming a community brigade system, which is, a community how do communities work, to be more resilient is a, current fascination.
Yeah. Yeah. But it's not always just about architecture. It's like creating different systems or creating, in general. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, somebody
Yeah.
asked me when, with the Water Abundance XPRIZE, like, well, wait, how does an architect, invent a water machine? I don't, it is everything that architecture should be. I mean, it's understanding systems, it's understanding structure and mechanical equipment for the benefit of, humans. Like,
Yeah.
how, I never stopped to think that it wasn't architecture, or to feel like, oh, I have to work within these narrow confines or silos of what an architect should be. That's the beauty, I think, of an architectural education. I think a beauty of a place like SCI-Arc that didn't necessarily pigeonhole it. It's different than an artist in a way, although there's personal exploration involved. It's more, how do we kind of creatively solve problems, and
Oh,
so there's all the pragmatic confines, and the code issues, and the budget issues, and the structural issues. It's how do you still come up with something that, is creative in the end.
yeah. And I mean, anybody that's gone through an architecture education knows that like some of our design problems were not architectural. It's like we would still do graphic design problems or like some other type of solution, some type of engineering thing, the whole right dropping an egg and you can create some structure that's gonna survive like the egg dropping and from the second floor of the architecture building or
Mhm.
in SCI-Arc or just even, I mean, and the old SCI-Arc, right, was just like that building. But I mean, there was so much creativity in that building, that I don't, it's like I just kind of like left. Like I haven't been to the new SCI-Arc. I was only to the old SCI-Arc, and I just kind of always thought like, oh, there's just something. I mean, everybody would go to the lectures. You'd be able to like talk to people. There were all these ideas. People were sleeping underneath their desks and everything, which of course, the fire department wasn't filled with that. But
Right,
you know,
right.
but I mean,
Hasn't really
that's just
changed that much. I mean, I do spend some time at SCI-Arc, and been actually currently, adjunct, and helping with a couple studios there, actually on wildfire resilience studios, which is interesting now. But um,
uh,
it hasn't changed that much, actually. I mean, it's just
okay
much larger scale,
in a different location.
very different location.
Yeah. Yeah, but I mean, that might have been right. That might be like what I mean, maybe like what I guess that was kind of like what Santa Monica was back then anyway, right? I mean, it
Yeah,
wasn't like this. Yeah, yeah. I mean, just
yeah,
like Venice, people are always saying, "Oh, Venice." I'm like, no. When we lived in Venice, nobody wanted to live in Venice.
true,
Yeah,
very true.
it's yeah. So, what would you like to say about the future of architecture?
Um, I think that it has to certainly take into account how are buildings resilient, and how are they regenerative, and not how are they not extractive but additive to
Mm,
um to the overall planet. That's what I'd like to see is that, could we achieve in our evolution, a harnessing of technology that would use resources in a way that wouldn't just completely usurp, resources in a linear
Yeah.
direction.
Yeah.
That,
Yeah. I mean, construction is right. It's like one of the most, energy consumptive things, but we need it, right? Like we're not able to like live in tents anymore, but I mean, maybe we could live in something like that. I don't know.
yeah, I mean, I think there's a lot of
Yeah.
we're at the precipice of a fundamental paradigm shift. I think, just like, we were living in an analog world, we moved into a digital world. I mean, it's pretty incredible that kind of change.
Yeah,
Um,
within like 30 years, right?
yeah, I mean, it's
Like even
pretty.
within like 20, yeah. Yeah.
Now it's escalating, and I think like even in the next decade with AI, I mean, it's going to happen exponentially. Like I think the exponential change is going to be so radical, um, that and so fast with AI that I think, well, maybe it could be used, kind of AI for good in that way that it could help us solve some of these problems. I mean, I think the problem is not the technology. The problem is the kind of the underlying roots of, say, capitalism and our political system that
Yeah.
embeds, older methods of doing things that, that are extractive, and feel threatened by the future rather than embracing the future. And
Hmm.
the question is, will we as a species be a self-terminating civilization or not, like many others that have existed? Because I think we're certainly in decline.
Yeah.
And so, but despite that, I mean, I'm very optimistic, and I think that
Hmm.
all that architecture can have and innovation can have is to harness technologies and innovations to advance the way we have shelters, the way that we live in our cities, the way that we transport, the way that we consume. Um, I'd like to think that eventually we'll get almost, to a vision like Buckminster Fuller had, which was, how much more can we do with less? And, can we create an abundance, versus the scarcity? Like I think our model right now is scarcity model, versus, we know that the planet has a carrying capacity for abundance for all people. I think that's possible.
Yeah.
We just
Yeah.
haven't harnessed it right,
Yeah.
yet.
Yeah. Yeah.
So,
Or things that Buckminster Fuller said, if we just like stopped spending all of this money on technology for defense and actually used it to, extend, it's like for humanity, it would be, it would be so much better. And that was like in the 60s. And here we are, it's 2025 and we're like, hey, it's like, let's look back to that, let's look back that far. Like, let's not look to the late 1800s. Like, let's look back to the 60s for some of these ideas.
no, no, I think they were visionary ideas. We just haven't even been able
Mhm.
to realize them, but we have realized some.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
the way there's, again, you think about the miracle that's our planet, and why should we be going to Mars? It's like, or to a dead planet that has no resource. Like, why don't we fix
Yeah. Yeah.
like
Yeah.
our only, home,
Yeah. Yeah.
um, and apply. We know less about, the ocean than we do galaxy. I'm all for exploration if we have fixed the problems in our own home. you
Mhm.
know, the suggestion is almost like, okay, well, we'll just keep doing the things in a poor way, and then a few of us will jettison off and fuck up a new planet.
Exactly. Yeah. Which, like, yeah, what about the rest of us, right? It's like you don't want to, there's not going to be some Wally dream out there where everybody's going to go off to like some, you know, dip somewhere and then they're going to come back to Earth. It's like what we have right now, like, we need to take care of it and we need to figure out all of the, we need to start solving some of the problems that we have here, which are totally solvable if people, want to work towards, a common good. I think, I mean, that's the way I think, but,
Yeah. Yeah. I wish I had a little bit more hope. I mean, I thought that like with something as little as COVID, such something so little could have so much, impact that was so universal that there wouldn't really be a debate about it, you know, but, but so, but that's pretty obvious. But climate change is much more diffused, much more atomized, much harder to fully, understand the causality of things. But, that using that space analogy, Bucky Fuller also, talked about spaceship Earth, like if you, it's a different mentality. Like we've had more of a Western kind of cowboy mentality where we, just like cut down everything we see and
Mm,
use it as a resource versus, a space person, economy is everything that you take has to be the strongest and the longest lasting and the lightest weight and everything you take, make, and waste is to be considered for the journey. And if we had that mentality about our planet, we would get a lot further along, on our journey.
yeah. Yeah. Well, thank you so much, David. Is there anything else that you would like to say, like to
No,
talk
thank you
about?
for having me
Okay.
on the show. I appreciate it.
Thank you. I'm just going to turn. I have to thank the SIPS Association again. You can contact them at sips.org, sips.org. Thank you very much. I'm going to stop the tape.